Welcome to another episode of Stuck in My Mind podcast. I am your host, WIZE, and I'm excited for my next guest. He's somewhat of someone we call a Renaissance man. So I'm excited to bring him on the show. Welcome to the show, Joel Bouchard. Hello.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Pleasure's all mine, man. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm doing great. How about you?
Awesome. I'm doing great. I get to do what I love to do, podcasting, and we're gonna have a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so your journey spans so many disciplines: psychology, art, music, and more. How do you balance these varied interests?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. And the answer is it kind of varies from hobby to hobby and from season to season a little bit. I'm a doctoral student in psychology, so that is very time consuming. So starting next week, middle of August until middle of May next year, that's my main hobby, right? Is learning. So that takes up a lot of the time. And then during the summer, or over winter break, that's when I have a little bit extra time. So that's when I do some more podcasting, and start writing, whether it's music or some books that I'm working on, that sort of thing, and engage in some of those other hobbies. Throughout the school year, right, I try to fit some things in. I do my podcast from North to Nothing every Saturday, and try to do a little bit of writing or playing a little bit of music, just a few minutes a day here and there, just to keep the skills up. But yeah, it varies. It varies from time of year, really.
Awesome. Can you talk about the inspiration behind your podcast, from nowhere to nothing, and what you aim to achieve through it?
Sure. Yeah. So from nowhere to nothing, it's a philosophy podcast, and the whole aim behind it really was to recreate the conversations that I used to have in my very first philosophy class. I went to community college and wasn't sure what philosophy was, but hey, you needed a class, so I took it, and it turned out to be, the coolest class I've ever taken. So, um, after the class, 10 years later, um, I'd become a musician. I have a home recording studio and stuff, and I go, I've got all the equipment. Why don't I start a podcast? And I go, well, what's it going to be about? And I go, some of the coolest discussions I ever had were in that philosophy class. So 10 years later, I called up my philosophy professor. I said, hey, you want to do a podcast? He said, yeah, sure. And we've been doing it for 6 years now. It's a blast. But sort of the premise of the show is we'll spend an hour looking at just one word, right? Or two words. And, we'll spend the first part of the episode sort of looking at historical thought, what philosophers throughout history have said about the topic. Then we'll spend some time in the middle, kind of in light of what philosophers have said in the world that we live in, what we think about it. And then we'll kind of tie up the end of the episode asking speculative questions, right? So based upon what historical philosophers have said and the discussion that we had, what are the implications for humanity in the future, right? What does it mean for us as people down the road? So that's kind of the overview of the show.
Okay. Also, thank you for your service. But how has your experience in the Army influenced your approach to psychology and philosophy?
Majorly, I would say, for sure, because on several fronts, right? I'm from a rural area. So I did not have a lot of interaction with people from various backgrounds until I joined the Army, right? And then you join the Army and you meet people from any background you can imagine. So, learning about different people, different cultures, different psychologies, certainly changed my viewpoints there, as well as philosophy, right? I spent a lot of my time in the smoke pit, right? And I don't smoke, but that's where all the interesting conversations were happening, right? That's where people are talking about God and talking about, the beginning of the universe and stuff. And those are the conversations I wanted to be in on. So, um, yeah, along with all of the things that happen when you're in the Army, right? I didn't do anything that I consider, great. It was a lot of training, a lot of boring stuff. Um, but even in the boring moments, you can learn a lot about the human psyche, especially in the Army, where in a training environment, lots of times you're going from 0 to 100 and then to 0 again, and seeing how that stress test affects people, and how they handle it and manage it, and how you handle it and manage it. So a lot. I think I learned a lot from my time in the Army.
So you also mentioned that you're a musician. As a multi-instrumentalist and record producer, how do you see the relationship between music and psychological well-being?
Yeah, there's an intimate connection there for sure. Music is kind of the thing that separates us from the animals in some ways, right? And there's a few different things that sort of set us apart, but music is a big one, right? Because okay, birds sing, but that's a method of communication, right? Whales sing, that's a method of communication. It's not really art for its own sake that we know of. Obviously, we can't put ourselves in their mindset, but so what humans are doing is pretty unique, and from a psychological standpoint, it affects a wide swath of your brain. From your temporal lobe, where you sense auditory sensations, to your prefrontal cortex, where you're thinking about music, and in your parietal lobe, and deeper in the brain, where you store memories and things. So this is the reason why a lot of people who might have Alzheimer's and not remember who their wife of 50 years is, you can start playing a song and they'll be able to sing the lyrics, right? Because the memory is so distributed throughout the brain. It really has an impact on all areas of the brain. So, from a psychological standpoint, I think music's really important. Not just therapeutically, and from a standpoint of how we experience the world. Um, but yeah, from a cultural standpoint as well.
Okay. Excuse me. So, how do you use your background in psychology to inform your creative process? In art and music.
Yeah. In a number of ways, right? I think that depending on your art form, right, whether it's um, painting or music or writing fiction or whatever, everybody has different styles, different ways of trying to get their message across. Um, I tend to like a psychedelic style, right? What I like to tell people is I want people to experience my art, whether it's music or painting or writing, and think that I'm on drugs. I'm not, but that's I always like that. Growing up, I always like listened to Jimi Hendrix, and I always liked these paintings with these crazy colors, and like 2001: A Space Odyssey, the end of the movie where things just kind of go crazy and real abstract. So that's always been the aesthetic that I've liked. So from a psychological standpoint, it helps, having studied how drugs affect the brain or how mental illness affects the brain. What is going on in these people's brains that's disinhibiting them from, controlling their behavior? Why do they act this way? And how can I sort of emulate or tap into that in a focused, creative sense to create something that seems wild? Um, so there's that. There's also the aspect of trying to balance um, practice and novelty, right? Because I think with any good art, what the artist is trying to do is deliver something that an audience enjoys and is familiar with without being boring. So if you go too conventional, then it's boring and nobody wants to appreciate it. And if you go too far the other way, then people go, I don't even know what I just saw or listened to. It's kind of meaningless. It's way out there. So it's trying to deliver something that somebody's familiar with, but in a different way. Like with music, people sort of want a verse, chorus structure. But if you adhere to that too tightly, or if you use predictable chord progressions or predictable melodies in conjunction with that, that's when you get boring. So you have to spice it up in some different way, right? You have to add in some twist that they're not expecting to hear. And I think that goes with art across the spectrum. So I think psychology helps with that, in knowing, being able to anticipate sort of what are people expecting here and why, and how do I practice an instrument or practice writing in such a way that develops novelty rather than sort of wears ruts into myself, right? I'm sort of against practicing an instrument for 6 hours a day, running through the same scales or chords over and over again, because then those just it becomes a crutch. That's what your go-to. That's what you do. So trying to practice in such a way that leads to new avenues rather than things that are kind of repetitive. So that's kind of the overview of how psychology influences art for me.
Okay. How many instruments do you play?
7. So bass guitar, drums, piano, and then the 3 you see behind me there: a ukulele, a mandolin, and a dulcimer.
Okay. Awesome. That's 7. Wow. um, what role does philosophy play in your daily life and decision making process?
Yeah. So what I like to tell people is that philosophy is everybody's favorite topic. They just don't know it yet, right? Philosophy kind of suffers from um, the the worst marketing in the world, right? I always tell people that the view of it is sort of that people think it's about dusty old books and guys with big beards who are mad at the world, but it's really a lot more than that, right? Philosophy is basically just the act of digging deeper into anything, um, and really thinking about something beyond the surface value, especially the reasons that you believe something, right? So you can do all kinds of things, and our show is sort of a demonstration of that. We've looked at the big topics like God and time and that sort of stuff. We've also done an episode on Disney princesses, so anything can be philosophical. Anybody can be a philosopher. All it is just finding what things are meaningful to you, and then being willing to go beyond the surface, and really dig into what's behind it. Kind of popping the hood and getting your hands dirty with the guts of the thing. So, as a philosopher, or somebody who likes philosophy,
Mhm.
that's just what I'm always trying to do, right, with any aspect of my life. And what you find is that it just makes you a more curious, energetic person, right? When things that you would normally just kind of pass over, or that you'd become bored or frustrated with, even at work, that sort of thing. If instead you're kind of like, well, why is that? Or is there a better way of doing this? Or, you know, it just opens up avenues for you to get involved in ways that you wouldn't if you weren't thinking about it deeper. And that's kind of the story of my life, right? I never set out to do a bunch of things, but just as stuff came up, I go, well, that's kind of interesting. Why is that? And then you get involved in stuff, and before you know it, you're into your neck.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, you've held leadership positions in both business and local government. How has your creative background influenced your leadership style?
Yeah. So, from the local government side, directly, because basically in my town, there's a situation where the board of trustees needed a new member, um, and the mayor happened to be a listener of my podcast, right? And so he had listened to me talk about philosophy, and he said, well, this is somebody who can think for themselves, and has a sort of a critical thinking, problem solving way of approaching things. So do you want this position? And it's one of those this is one of those things I'm talking about, right? Because I'm an introvert, like I don't really care for people. I don't really care for leaving the house, that sort of thing. So I would never run for office. But because they had this opening, and so they were able to appoint somebody halfway through a term, he said, well, I want to appoint you. Do you want to try it? And the big thing, in life, right, is that you're never ready for anything, right? If you wait to do something until you're ready, it's just never going to happen. So
Yes, you're waiting
as
forever.
life, yeah, yeah. So as life brings you opportunities, you just have to take them. And so I go, well, I'm an introvert. I don't like doing public stuff, but this opportunity is likely never going to come up again. So I'm going to do it, right? And I'm glad that I did. I've had the opportunity to make a lot of changes in the local community, and get involved with other people who are who are equally interesting and equally invested in making the local community and the world a better place. So I'm glad for it.
Okay. Hmm. How do you approach the challenge of moving from structured environments like the military or academia to the more fluid realms of art and music?
Yeah, that's a good question. And people do ask that a lot. Um, I think that as as boring as it sounds, or as counterintuitive as it sounds, I think that you can take a lot more from the military and from academia and apply it to art than vice versa. Um, you know, having some structure is a good thing. And artists don't like to hear that, right? Musicians and writers and painters and whoever, they don't want to hear that structure is a good thing. A lot of your career is sort of rebelling against these things. But I have a lot of friends who are artists who you end up you talk to a lot of writers who have writer's block, right? Oh, I can't write anything. Or you talk to a musician who has recorded one song and now they're just constantly tweaking, right? Oh, there's something not wrong with that kick drum. Oh, there's something not wrong with that guitar line. Oh, these things don't mesh, and they never release anything, right? And I think that what a lot of that is on one level perfectionism, which I think is the enemy of all artists. But I think on the other aspect of that is having some structure to how you approach your art. Um, and just because you have a structure or a plan to approaching it doesn't mean that you don't have creativity within it. Any act is a creative act, right? Humans are learning machines. Humans
Yeah.
are creative machines, right? So with everything that we do, no matter how mundane it is, you're always applying some aspect of creativity. And
Hmm.
sort of like I alluded to earlier, talking about how to write, how I kind of write music and stuff. Um, you know, finding what your approach is, and then finding ways to shake it up, to make it interesting and novel within the structure that you've set helps you be more productive. So a lot of people ask me that, hey, you're a really busy guy, and yet you've released 5 albums and 4 EPs and a bunch of singles and stuff, and every summer you'll sit down in the studio and you'll write an album and release it in 2 weeks, playing all the instruments, doing all the producing by yourself. How do you do that? And I go, well, the first thing is I'm not a perfectionist. Like I don't worry about having all of the beats line up.
Yeah.
I don't worry about a lot of that stuff. And if that's what people want to tear you apart for, then let them have at it. But my view is I'd rather be a dandelion than a rose, right? If you're a rose, you're gonna grow once, and if the pH in the soil's too high, you're dead. If you're a dandelion, you just find a crack in the concrete, and there you go. You just sprout, right? So so that's it, right? I'm not a perfectionist, um, and I have a structure, so that I know that when I get done with something, I'm going to look back on it in the future, right? I'm going to look back on it years later and say, I wish I'd done this different, or I could have done this different.
Yeah.
But that's always true, right? Even if if it's once again one of those things. If you wait until it's perfect, it's never going to get done. So at some point, you just have to say, hey, this is what it is. And what I found over time is that those things that right after I release an album that bother me, where I go, you know what? I wish I'd redone that take, or I wish I had EQ'd this different. Um, Years later down the road, what I find is that's what gives the thing its character, right? I go back and go, okay, well, that was kind of like a snapshot of my life at that time. There's memories that are involved with it, and there's some uniqueness, some idiosyncrasy with it that wouldn't be there if I had made it into a perfect plastic block of music.
Okay. what what motivated you to pursue a doctoral degree in psychology, and how do you see it complementing your other passions?
Yeah. So I'm a little weird. I just like going to school. So I've got an associate's degree in criminal justice and a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies and a master's degree in education. So now I'm getting a doctorate in psychology, and basically all of that is thanks to the Army, right? The Army makes school cheap.
Hmm.
So since it's cheap, I just keep going. Like a lot of people ask me, well, what are you going to do with your degree? Probably nothing. I'll probably get another one. I think I want to go back for maybe a bachelor's degree in physics or something next time, astronomy, something like that. Um, but no, I just like going. I like learning. Um, I like how every time you're learning something, it's giving you a fresh perspective on everything else that you know, and especially in the realms of psychology or education. The lessons you learn in class, you can really apply to all the other parts of your life. So it's really just another hobby for me. But
Okay. Well, all right. Um, how does your artistic expression through painting and music help you navigate the complexities of life?
yeah, I think that it kind of comes back to what I was just saying, right? It's a snapshot of life in a way.
Because I know for me personally, right, there's certain songs and music that were key in certain parts of my life that, like, I can tell you, like, in '08, I was widowed. My wife passed away in a car accident, and there's certain albums that stick with me from that year because there was certain songs on those albums that kind of helped me get through what I was going through. And so for me, music has always been like there's certain songs that have very a lot of meaning to me because they played a major part in helping me heal and helping me overcome certain obstacles in life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the way it is for everybody, right? And I think that that's why music is so important to people as a whole, people psychologically, right? Is because it does play those kind of roles. So, I think that anybody can experience that, right? Just listening to music, and I have that, right? I have um, there's two albums that I listened to on repeat when I was in AIT, which in the Army is kind of the second half of basic training. So the first half of basic training, you're doing all your combat stuff. You're not listening to music. You don't have a phone. You don't have anything, right? You're sleeping under the stars, that sort of thing. The second half is your job training. What you're going to actually do, so that you have a little bit more freedom. And there's two albums that I just listened to on repeat, and to this day, I can't listen to anything off of them without being back there. And the same thing for driving. Um, and like you said, difficult emotional moments, happy emotional moments. Music plays that role. So, and that's for everybody. For a musician yourself, you're even that much closer to it, right? Like I was saying, I go back and I listen to the first album I ever made, and like I said, when I first released that album, a year later, I go, man, I know so much more about EQ and compression and all this stuff. Like I wish, this sounds like crap. I wish I'd done it totally different. But now I listen back to it and I listen to all of that amateurish stuff and I go, this is who I was then,
Mhm.
and it's more special that way, right? Than if it was perfect. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it was Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age is the one who said that, he said each album is really like a picture of my life at that time. And that kind of resonates with me.
Oh, it's same with me here in podcasting because you can go listen to the first few episodes and you can hear the difference.
Oh yeah.
You can go and listen and you can see the quality of mic, the equipment, and everything, and it's different sound. It's a completely different sound. And for me, it was like when I dropped my first episode, it was probably like 5, 7 minutes long. It was just an introduction, and my nephew was like, "Nah, we can't release it until it's perfect." I'm like, "Nah, we're gonna release it because I want people to see the growth. I want them to see where we started at. I want them because it was nothing like this. It was me recording on a uh podcasting studio that I bought from Amazon for like $160 using Audacity to record it. And I didn't even have the jack for my cell phone that plugs into the mixer. I had to hold the phone to the mic because my nephew was on the phone at that time. I had to hold the phone to the mic and let it play that way and let him talk that way. And it was it was amazing because then a few months later I started investing in equipment and getting getting the proper equipment that I needed. We did the first episode. It was so I just kept the first episode and then added an additional 30-35 minutes of something new, newer content, just so it can be a reintroduction and people can see. And it was like night and day. It was like, oh man, like we've come so far in just a little bit of time that we started. But and even now, I've you can see the growth from 2 years ago to where I'm at now, because now I've learned how to structure my show better. Now, before, when I 2 years ago, it took me about hour, 2-3 hours to set up a show. Now I do it in 30 minutes, and you can see the growth, and you can see just the experience of just starting from where you started from.
Yeah, and I think that it's important for people to be honest about that, and it's hard, especially in today's day and age, right? Because I remember when I started releasing albums, you didn't, you know, there was a lot less technology wise, and so people weren't expecting the level of professionalism that they are now. Same thing with
Yeah.
podcasting, right? Same thing with everything. It's it people are expecting perfection, and but you know what? That's really not what sells people on it. Because I've heard a lot of professional podcasts that don't sound as good as my podcast, right?
Mhm.
And so that tells you, well, people are into the content, right? If you're not an audiophile, somebody who really cares about sound, then you'll listen to somebody talking with all the reverb echoing off the walls and all that kind of stuff. You'll listen to it because you're interested in what the message is. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that creators can lose sight of pretty easy, right? If you're a musician, you might think, okay, well, I want to make music that's like the most technically brilliant. I want this blazing guitar solo or this sort of thing. Non-musicians don't care about that stuff, right? They care about the song as a whole, right? They're listening to the lyrics, they're listening to how the all of the instruments together make them feel. They don't really care about a guitar solo, right? So yeah, focusing on the right things, right? What things make sense to you, and then where you want to make progress, right? Because podcasting is a great one. I'm the same way, right? You listen to my first episode, it's painful to listen to, um, both from uh, the audio side, but also the personal side, right? But at the same time, there's something where you go, okay, here I am, a guy who's never interviewed anybody before, never really done a structured show, and I'm finding my way through it, right?
Yeah.
And you can see that progression, and I think that that's a lot more beneficial for people to go on that journey than to start out saying, "Hey, look, I know everything. It's all professionally done." That doesn't really encourage people to take that first step, right? And podcasting is a big one. A lot of people, I think it's something like 90% of shows don't last 10 episodes, and it's probably
Yeah.
because people put out an episode and they listen to the quality and they listen to themselves tripping up and stuff, and they go, I'm just not meant for this.
Yeah.
Sure you are. You just need practice. Like, you just need to do it a few times, and hone your skills, and you'll be just fine. But I think those are the people that persevere, are the people that are doing it for the right reasons, right? The people that want to have conversations like this rather than just are looking to rack up a bunch of listens so that they're famous or something, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that that's the big message is, you have to take the first step, right? You cannot wait till things are perfect. You can't wait till the time is right. You just have to take the first step. You have to go on the journey. You have to view failure really as a learning opportunity and a way to improve. Um and that's the key. That's the key to getting anywhere, right? With
Yeah.
anything.
Uh, Like prior to podcasting, I didn't know the difference between a condenser mic, a dynamic mic. Didn't know anything. I was not into. I was not. I was not in media. I'm a. I'm a. I'm now. I just got promoted, but I'm a pit boss in a casino,
Hmm.
and so for me, this was a whole different realm. This is like something different, completely new for me, and once I figured out that this was something I love to do, I spent a lot of time on YouTube University. Learned a lot of stuff, how to edit, how to what what camera, what I spent a lot of time on improving, and it was because I wanted to learn and grow, and I felt like, all right, if I'm going to do this and people are going to listen to my podcast, um, they're giving me something very precious, which is their time, and I want to make sure that I give them the best of me. I want to make sure I give them quality sound. I give them a quality picture. I just wanted to make sure that their time wasn't misspent.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and that's where this is philosophy, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, what is philosophy? It's looking at anything and digging into it a little bit. Because once you dig into it a little bit, you start to ask yourself some deep questions like, okay, why am I podcasting? What's the most important part of it? Is it the conversation I'm having with this guest, or is it the audience, or is it, the quality and the exposure of the show? And there's no right or wrong answers to that. It all depends on what your goals are, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, I love audio, obviously. So my audio quality is pretty good, I think, for my
Mhm.
show. And I love conversations with my ex professor. So that's a highlight. But I hate marketing, right? So like my website's not great. My Facebook's not great. Even my episode descriptions, it's usually one sentence. Hey, in
Yeah.
this episode, this is what we talk about. If you want to know more, listen to the episode, right? I'm not going to have 3 pages of show notes. It's just,
Yeah.
that's not who I am. But every time I'm a guest on a show and they do that, I appreciate it, right? They go, oh, okay, hey, we had Joel Bouchard on. Here's his whole bio. Here's all the links to his stuff. And I appreciate it. But that's just not me, and what's the secret to being happy in life? I mean, part of it's just doing the stuff that you want to do.
Yeah.
But meaningful things that you can put some effort and thought into, right? I think that process of growing and learning and becoming better at the things that you enjoy doing, that's what gives you that sense of fulfillment.
Oh yeah. Like when I first started, I don't even think I had descriptions. I barely had titles, and now I like I said, I really take my time to make sure I have descriptions, make sure I have a good title for the podcast, because it's something that I love to do. It's something that I have such a great time doing it, and just the conversations that I get to have, and the people I get to meet. To me, it's amazing. I'm like, oh man, I would have. I've interviewed people from all over the world, and had it not been for the podcast, I would have never been able to do that and experience that. And I'm blessed to be able to do it. And so for me to really, if I felt like if I was going to continue to do it, then I just wanted to make sure that that it was the best that I can do. I didn't want to half-ass it. I didn't want to I just wanted to just record. No, I wanted to make sure that I improved with each and every episode.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's great, and that's a lesson that I really didn't learn until pretty recently, right? Because like I said, I come from an audio background,
Yeah.
so the quality was all right, and wanted to start my podcast to have these philosophical conversations with my professor, but the audience really didn't occur to me much until years in, and then finally I decided to check analytics for the first time. I go, there's been people on 6 continents that have listened to me, right? I'm
Yeah.
the number 1 philosophy podcast in some of these little countries and stuff, right? That's kind of a big responsibility, you don't realize what kind of impact you might be having on people, and you go, okay, well, I have to take this more seriously, even if that's not the reason that I do it, right?
Yeah.
Because for years I didn't care if nobody listened to the show. I just wanted it recorded for posterity's sake, so I could listen back to a conversation that I had with my professor, or I could show it to my friends or something like that, and we could have another discussion off of that. But yeah, there's definitely a sense of responsibility when you realize that you have an audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way to go about getting an audience, right? You don't want to start out looking to get an audience. And I think that's why 90% of podcasts don't make it 10 episodes, is because you start out and nobody's listening right away and you go, this isn't going to work.
That's part of it, and the fact that it's hard work.
Yeah. Yeah.
People think you just come and record. No, this is hard. Like how you said, there's a lot of work into really doing this. Like I didn't know a clue about editing an episode. I didn't know anything, and it took me on YouTube and finding videos and watching them, and it's just like, okay, I can do this, and just start practicing, start working on editing my episodes, and then as time went on, I was like, I think I want to do lives. Why? Because I wanted to stop editing.
That's a good
So
reason. I never do them like it's still just it freaks me out a little bit, right? I do them as guests. Like as a guest, it's not bad. As a host, I still don't have the guts to do them. I go, I don't know. What if I start stumbling over myself, or I've got some
it
questions that don't
happens.
work or something.
It
But yeah,
happens.
I mean, I should know better by this point that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still haven't gotten over it. But the thing is, right, all these things that are hard work, if they're things that you want to do, then they're really not work,
Yeah.
and
This is true.
that's the way I've structured my whole life, right? Is I do things that I like to do, and I just dig below the surface and start asking the deeper questions and trying to learn them and engage with them. And and then eventually if you're spending enough time and curiosity into learning them, they become more substantial than what you ever set out to have them be. So
Okay. So how do you envision the future of your podcast, and what topics are you excited to explore next? Like what philosophical ideas are you excited for?
yeah, it's gotten really interesting over the past few years, right? Because when I started, we were just going to do 10 episodes. And that was going to be it. We were going to do 10 episodes on the biggest topics, so
Yeah.
God, time, self, knowledge, these things. And we got to the end of the 10 and we go, there's so much other stuff to talk about. Like, why don't we just keep going?
Yeah.
So now we're almost 200 episodes in, 6 years. And it's funny because it's just from week to week, a lot of the conversations that we have now that we've got this big base of episodes, a lot
Yeah.
of the things we talk about from week to week connect back to other things that we've talked about. And then throughout the discussion, almost inevitably, there will be this one concept that will keep popping up that we haven't talked about. We go, okay, well, that's what we should talk about next week, right? So it's really not planned. Like it's, I've got a list on my phone of episodes, topics that we haven't done yet that we can try, but we
Okay.
almost never use it. Like the same list has been on my phone for years, and occasionally we knock one or two off if both of us are really stumped. But for the most part, it's pretty natural. Things just pop up and we go, "Hey, we haven't talked about that yet, have we? We should do an episode." So,
Yeah.
so it's very unstructured. So as a result, I can't really say what the future will look like. But we were just talking about in the last episode, right? That I mentioned at the end. I said, this is probably one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. And he goes, yeah, the podcast just keeps getting better and better.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. I'm looking forward to the future of it, but I don't know what it's going to bring.
Oh yeah. No, I do a show with one of my best friends, and it's called Mentality, and it's just with each episode it just gets better and better, because we get just more and more comfortable with each other, and it's like, okay, how can I top this past episode, and without trying it just happens, and it's because we work so well together. Like he sets it up where, all right, this topic I know he can cook on, and he can do this, and so he just sets it up, and I just smack them. I just go out and hit them out the park, but it's just we'll sit down and we'll record an episode, and I'm like, oh man, this was a pretty good episode. Then in the process, after he edited it and everything, he sends it to me, and I start listening to it, and I'm like, man, this is just became my favorite episode. And this is like every following episode, it's like, man, this is like my favorite episode now, and it's because we just go in and with each episode, it just gets better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's certainly the case when you have somebody that you podcast with on a regular basis. Cause I know it's
Yeah,
the same thing with him and me, 6 years, right?
yeah,
After that long, I can start to detect like, okay, he lost his train of thought answering this question, so I'll help him out. Or he's really struggling with this one, so I'll kind of add on to the question so he's clear on what I'm saying. Or um, I kind of lost what he was saying, and so you start to play off each other really well. And sometimes, like the last episode that we did, right, an hour long podcast, and it's a pretty technical talk. Like I said, we're talking about historical philosophers. We're talking about some of these things, and I had a list of questions, and I didn't ask a single one. The whole conversation was just completely natural. There wasn't any questions asked that I had planned in advance. I only
yeah.
asked questions that came up to me at the time. So there's something to be said for podcasting with the same people over and over again. But I think even then, there's some skills that transfer to other things, right? You and I've never podcasted together, but after years and years of doing it, both on my own show, but now I've been a guest on 30 plus shows. You start to get a feel for just um, not just that particular person you podcast with every day, but just how conversations in general
Go,
sort
yeah.
of flow in a podcast setting.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's something. When I first started, it was I didn't know how to control the show. I didn't know how to like steer the show and everything. And that comes with time. That comes with me improving and learning and really, all right, this is the questions I want to ask. This is where I want to steer the show towards. And it took me quite a few episodes to really learn and improve and really learn how to take the reins of the show, because there was times where it seemed like the guests took over the show, and I wasn't really hosting it, and that goes with experience. That I'm saying, you gain all that with, especially me not being a professional host, not doing shows. So it was really just okay. All right, I'm learning. I'm okay now. I got to learn how to, like I said, learn how to control the show and have the guests not take over the show. Yes, I want it to be about them, but I also want it to be where there's not just them talking. Sometimes it's good for me to interact and talk, and so I've learned that through, and I've been podcasting 4 years now, so it's taking me a couple of years to really learn that.
Yeah, and that's one that that's always going to be difficult, right? Because on my show, occasionally I'll have special guests, not too often, but occasionally, and I struggle hard with that, right? Because you do get used to the one guy that you podcast with,
Yeah.
or if you're a guest, right? Um, you're on the show, they're expecting you to do the majority of the talking. If you get carried away and you go on forever, lots of times guys won't stop you; they'll just let you go. Um, but as the host, yeah, you never know who you're getting it as a guest. So I had one guy, right? I'd ask him a question, and he was just giving me one word answers. You know,
Oh, I've had
yeah,
those. I've
yeah, I
had
agree. And I'm like, where do I go from here? We're 15 minutes in. I asked all
yeah,
my questions, an
yeah.
hour long show. Then you have the opposite, right? Where you've got 6 questions planned for an hour long episode. You asked one, and now you're 35 minutes in. You go, okay, well, how am I going to play catch up? How do I control the pace of this? So, yeah, that's as a host, it's definitely a really difficult thing to do.
Oh yeah, I've had those guests where you would expect more from the, like, but like you said, it's like, yeah, I know that. It's like, can I get some more substance? Can you tell me a little bit more? Can you give me a little bit more than the one word answer? And I like, You're killing me, dude.
Yeah, there's that, and then there's the people who are trying to sell something is rough too, because you'll no matter what question you ask, it always comes back to whatever it is, the book that they just wrote or whatever the thing they developed, and you're like, okay, I brought you on here to have a conversation, not to try to sell something. So yeah, being a host is challenging. It's much more
Yeah,
challenging than
it
being a
does.
guest.
It does have its challenges. All right, let's see. Oh man, what advice would you give to someone who wants to pursue multiple passions but feels overwhelmed by the prospect of balancing them all?
Yeah. You have to do it, it's sort of I feel like we've answered this question throughout the episode in bits and pieces, so I'll try to
Yeah,
draw it together here a little bit. You have to do what you want to do in life. And that, that can look it's going to look different for every person, right? I've got a lot of things that I do. I also prioritize, sleeping. I sleep 8.5 hours a night, right? I work out, you know, um, I'm married. I've got a social life. I've got friends and stuff. So it's not like I'm just sitting here in my room, doing all these weird hobbies to the neglect of something else, right? You
yeah,
want to have a well-rounded life. You need physical health, right? In order, you need a healthy body to have a healthy brain. You need to have healthy relationships. You need people that you can rely on and that support you.
mhm,
Um, and most of all, right, people that understand you, right? My wife, she knows I'm a weirdo. Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna spout off about some philosophical theories and talk about, all kinds of different stuff. And she's cool with it, right? Or my
yeah,
friends, they call me the robot, right? Because lots of times I'm very analytical, very sort of and they like me anyways. So finding your people, right? The people that accept you for who you are. That
yeah,
all that stuff is foundational. They call that in psychology, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need to feel safe. You need to be physically taken care of. You need to have all those things in place before you can go pursuing some of the bigger things. After that, um, it's structure, right? It's figuring out, it's prioritizing, right? I tell you what, right now, I only got 3 colors of t-shirts, right? White, gray, and black, and that's because I don't have to make any choices, right? I don't have to spend time thinking about what I'm gonna wear, you
yeah,
know? Um, I've researched my weightlifting routine so that I can condense it. I can do a whole day's worth of workout in less than 20 minutes. So I'm not spending a whole lot of time doing it, but I'm still staying in shape, right? Um, I eat healthy, but I eat the same thing every day, right? I found the things that I liked, the things that I could bear to eat that were healthy, and then I stuck with them, and then eventually I ended up liking them, and then the palate diversifies a little bit. You start including some new stuff, but you can't just say one day, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to be a vegan," and then just do it. Most people can't do that, right? You have to find the things that you like. Hey, all right, I hate broccoli, but I like cucumbers, right? So I'm gonna eat some
yeah,
cucumbers, and then and start small and kind of work your way up. It's the same thing with the stuff that you don't want to do, like dieting, as the stuff that you do like to do, like music, right?
yeah.
When I was 14, I didn't know how to play anything. And me and my friends, just a teenage boy thing, said, "Hey, let's start a band. Like you'll play drums and you'll play guitar." None of us knew how to play anything. Um, but I taught myself because I wanted to and it was fun. And then eventually over time taught myself the other instruments and how to build a computer and how to, do audio engineering and stuff. So it's structure, right? It's prioritizing what you want to do, realizing how much time you have to devote to it, and following your passions, following things that you like to do, and not being a perfectionist about it, right? Just accepting that when something is done, it's okay to say, this is what it is. And even if I don't feel great about it now, I know that someday I'll be able to look back and at least say that I accomplished something, right? I did write a book. I've got my book. I did
Yeah.
write an album. You can go on iTunes and find my albums, right? And even if you think they suck, they're there. I'm a dandelion, so I'm just trying to find the things that I like to do and be productive. But that's probably my best advice.
Awesome, awesome. We've come to the part of the show where you get the solo screen and you get to plug away, let them know where they can find the podcast, everything.
Cool. Uh, yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, world's worst marketer, not something I enjoy doing. So, podcast from nowhere to nothing. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Um, if you want to listen to my music, you can type my name into Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you can listen to my stuff there. My book just came out, The Sleeper, the Scholar, and the Strix. You can find that on Amazon. And yeah, that's really pretty much it. If you want to suggest a topic for us to cover on the podcast, from nowhere to nothing podcast at gmail.com.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for having for being a guest first of all, and stopping by and having a wonderful conversation with me. I greatly appreciate you spending the time with me, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, listen, I didn't enjoy this too much, man. And there was at one point, I was like, I'm having so much fun with this, and that I felt like I felt selfish. And a guest pointed out to me was like, there's nothing selfish about what you're doing. You're enjoying you're enjoying, having a good time, you're learning, and at the same time you're sharing it with your audience. There's nothing selfish to enjoying great conversations and getting to meet amazing people and learning more about, like you said, you've learned so much when you enter the military, the army, because you got to learn about different cultures, different races, all different types of people. So I feel me being able to do my podcast, I've spoken to people from Japan, Australia, India, Taiwan, Korea. It's like, okay, I get to see how other people are living. I get to see how I get to learn how other people think and what they do. And so for me, it's like, oh man, I love this. I just want to continue to learn and speak to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing with me, you know? I every once in a while, my wife will say, "You know what? I think you're on too many podcasts. Like, maybe you should cut down your guest appearances." But, yeah, it's addictive, especially when you have somebody like you who's doing great work and providing people with good content, then you're doing a good thing for the world. So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with it.
But thank you so much. But don't leave just yet. Let me close out the show and we'll chat a little bit off the air. But thank you so much for being a great guest.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Another great episode is in the books. I'm excited for the future episodes. I got some amazing guests coming up. Um, Big shout out to my Real Wise fam, Poppy J, Brandy J. Big shout out to the boss lady. Love you and appreciate you. Big shout out to everybody who tuned in, or if you catch the replay, shout out to you as well. If you haven't subscribe, share, uh, turn on the notification bell, everything. And as always, a big shout out to all the essential workers out there. God bless y'all. Be safe. You know your boy Wise does it. Peace out.